Big Sky Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio. And we are having a recording of part 2 here with the cryptid research machine from over there in western Idaho, Chewy and Toby. And we're going to catch up a little bit. There was a couple things that we didn't get to bring up in the last episode, and then we're going to kind of switch to a little bit slightly different subject on this one. But welcome back to the show, Chewy and Toby.
Awesome, dude. Thanks for having us back on. We're really looking forward to this.
Yeah, we appreciate letting us come on.
No problem, guys. I'm sure everybody will be enjoying what they're going to be hearing on this show, because it's not your usual Bigfoot cryptid show, although we're going to kind of start out that way, because Chewy told me the last time I talked to him that he had at least one more report of weird cryptid that he hadn't actually got to mention on the last one.
Yeah, those are actually my buddy Toby here has actually had an encounter just a few days ago, and he's going to go on to talk about something that happened to one of his sons here in the canyon, and so we'll let him jump into that.
Yeah, my middle boy used to work for Fish and Game as an intern, and that's how he got into the fisheries business. And so now he's working for a fish farmer down in the canyon. And he's been on a couple expeditions with Chewy and I, and he's seen this thing 40 feet away, Sasquatch. And he's a knower now. He says, "Dad, I'm not a believer. I'm a knower." And so with that open mind, this last winter, he drives about 45 miles one way, and he leaves at 4:00 in the morning, and he's driving down the road. He spots this white creature about 100 yards in front of him, and as he gets closer to it, he said that this thing stood up. It was over 8-9 feet tall, skinny like a starving man, but as white can be, and long fingers. And I asked him, I said, "Well, give me more description. Could you see its face?" He says its eyes were huge, like the size of a coffee cup. And he didn't know what it was, and it scared him. Well, this thing, as he got within about 20 feet of it, and I said, "You kept going towards it?" He said, "Well, I wanted to know what it was, Dad." I said, "I'd have turned around and gone the other way," but he's always carrying a firearm with him. And so when he got about 20 feet from it, it ran like the wind, jumped a 5-foot barbed wire fence, and took off in the brush. And so he called me, and he's just rattled. He's scared. And he says, "I don't know what this was." And I said, "Well, has there been any small animals disappearing around the area?" He said, "Yeah, a lot of dogs, a lot of cats, a lot of animals that have been lame or sick have been disappearing." And so I called a buddy of mine down south, because my son said, "Dad, the only reference I could find to it is this thing called a rake." And I said, "I think that description on Creepypasta is, I don't know if that thing is real or not. Who knows?" But I called.
What they did is they made up a new name for the ghoul, the old classic monster, the ghoul. They just renamed it.
Yeah, and that's what we think he saw. And we went down there and was investigating, and the only place that I could find that it could take cover is maybe in some of the cave systems or in one or two of the old barns. And I couldn't get permission to go on this guy's property, because he says weird things happen, and I don't need weird people doing weird things. So I just told my son, I said, "That's probably where it's hanging out. I think if it won't attack you. I think you just take a shot at it or whatever, pray." But that really, he just says, "Dad, where are these things coming from?" I said, "I don't know. I think that the World Wide Web is giving us access to things that have always been there, and it just seems like time is accelerated, and these things are showing themselves more and more, but I think they've always been around." So that was the only encounter that my family or I have ever had with a ghoul. And so we're looking and listening and seeing if anything else comes up, and if we do, we'll keep you posted on that. But I had last November, I was going to our church, and I was cleaning at night, 11, 12 o'clock at night, just to help out. And we have an old Kmart building that Kmart shut down, and a farm store came in and bought it, and they gutted it. So this building is probably 2 acres of building. So it's a good sized building, and it's a brick building, and it's been gutted. And one night I heard about 12 o'clock, as I was shutting the security gate to the church, it was a high pitched moan, like scream, and then it sounded like either, you know, those big dumpsters that are commercial dumpsters in the back of industries. It
Yeah.
sounded like something had picked up one of those and threw it, or something picked up like an oxyacetylene bottle and threw it. Just that clang, 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 and then it screamed again. So I usually carry a 357 on me, but I pulled out my 12 gauge, and I was looking around and I started yelling because I usually don't get surprised, but it kind of scared me. So not sure. I contacted a buddy of mine down south, and he says, you know, he says it could be a number of things, and this is on the outskirts of town. There shouldn't be anything like that. And I saw something that was bipedal, a shadow of something dart from one side of the building to another through one of the big truck entrances where they'd getting all this equipment and stuff. And so I go home, and I get home, and my daughter, she was 18 at the time. She says, "Dad, what's going on? Why do you got your gun?" And I told her what I heard, and she says, "That's kind of scary, Dad." I said, "It is." 30 minutes later, she and I both heard that same scream outside of our house, and my dogs went crazy. They didn't want me to go outside. Of course, you know, it's my property. I'm going to go out there, and I have a flashlight and my shotgun. I give my daughter a double barrel 20, and I said, if you see something, shoot it. I don't know what it is, but apparently it's tracking us. And that was the last time I'd heard anything until last week. I was at work. My wife was at work. My daughter, she's 18, and my other daughter, she's 10. My oldest daughter went and picked up my younger daughter, and they came home. And I get a call at 4 o'clock on the dot, and both girls are crying. I said, "What's the matter?" They said, "Dad, we were sitting here at 3:45. We just got home. We were getting ready to do the dishes and prepare dinner for you guys. And on the east side of my house, I've got probably a 1,400 square foot home with vaulted ceilings, so they're pretty tall. They heard something climb up the east side of our house, and between 8 to 10 strides, stomp on the roof." And they were scared. The dogs were going crazy. This is in the middle of the afternoon. And she called me. They're crying. I said, "Well, lock the doors. I'll be home." You know, it took me about 15 minutes to get home. And I didn't find any tracks that I could really make out, but there was some debris and stuff where I thought something was there. I don't know what it was, but on the side of my house next to my neighbor's, there's about 4 feet from the side of my house to the fence of where my neighbor's house is. So there's nothing that could have ran and jumped on the roof. It had clawed, or I'm assuming it climbed up the side of the house from what the girls were telling me. And there's some of my siding that had been pulled away. It's like that T111 siding that you nail up. A couple places that had been pulled away from the side of the house. And so that was really concerning. And so I did a perimeter sweep that night. I stayed up quite late. 2 nights later, my daughter's awoken about 1 o'clock in the morning, and she hears something walking on our roof, and then her window, which from the roof's edge to the top of her window is about 4 feet. She could hear something tapping. And she said, "Get out of here. I don't want to deal with you." And then she heard a low guttural growl, and it scared her. And I get up, and I don't see anything, and you just got that really strange feeling. And so that was this last week. That was the newest encounter that we've had. So I called my buddy back. He lives in the South. He's experienced with this kind of stuff as well. And we got to talking, and he says, "You know, Toby, the thought of what kind of creature that could be," he says, "there's only 2 in my mind that it could be." And he says, "I want to send you a picture." I said, "Okay." He had a giveaway on his property that was white, and he's got hair from it when it got caught in the brambles, and he's going to send me some just as a keepsake, you know. And he showed me. He said when he first saw it, he didn't think they were violent. He didn't know much about them, so he started going out camping, trying to find it and stalk it. And he said that he it was throwing something at his camp, so he just grabbed his crap because he felt he wasn't welcome. And as he's driving home, he was about 2 to 3 miles from his house because it was on his property when he he's driving and he sees it about 30, 40 feet away, and it throws something at the hood of his car. And he just gets out, and it's just about dark. And he gets out and takes a picture of it, and it was a deer leg that had been fashioned. It looked like it had been fashioned in some kind of a weapon. It's either got tendons or it's got some of the hide still left on it that was tied to the side of the leg. And I think Chewy sent you the picture of that. And then he said the next morning he found the remains of that deer in his front driveway that was just mutilated. And he says, I think it was a warning to leave it alone. And I said, yeah. He goes, I'm still going to go out after it. I said, good luck with that. But yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't advise that he do that.
Yeah, he works for a security outfit that guards like mental institutions and government-owned facilities and things like that. And so he's pretty experienced with weapons and stuff like that. But yeah, I said, buddy, I said, you need to be careful.
Yeah, and that ain't a human, and your little pop gun ain't gonna do much.
No. Yeah. So yeah, that was our latest. And with dealing with this, I think that we talked last episode about my dad having encounters with this thing called the whistling bear, not knowing what it was. Since they've moved back to Idaho, they moved back 4 years ago. They moved to Washington State from Southern Idaho, I think in '76. They moved, and I moved back in '94. They moved back to the area 4 years ago, and they live on the outskirts of town. And I told you last episode that my dad, he began to smell the smell of that thing again when he was a child, and he was hearing this thing running along the canals and dogs just, barking and in fear and running the opposite direction from this thing. This last December, he was sleeping and he's got a little white schnauzer, and it woke up just whimpering and it peed all over itself in the bed. And my dad got up and he got a really strange feeling, and he was going to go outside, and he just felt it wasn't safe. A couple hours later, he felt it was safe, and he came across in the snow about 20 feet from the house these tracks that he said they were about 11 to 14 inches long. He was just kind of using the measurement of his cane. And you could see 4 toes, and then you could see claw marks in the snow, and they were rather big. And he said the gait on this thing that it was stepping was about 4.5 to 5 feet. And it really freaked him out. And he called me, he says, what do you think that is? I said, Dad, I don't know what that is. It could be that thing that the whistling bear that you were dealing with as a child. And for some reason, he feels that there's some kind of a spiritual connection to this thing. And he's had several other encounters. He went and bought some thicker curtains for his house because he felt that it was watching him while he was asleep, that it was a really thin curtain. And so he says, the first thing I did is I got thicker curtains. And I don't sleep on that side of the bed. We move the bed because he says when he gets those feelings, it creeps him out. And so we're in continual investigation on whenever he has any feelings or signs, just documenting it. And we go out there and pray, and he starts praying, and then the he calls it the evil presence leaves. But he feels that through most of his life there was some kind of a connection with this thing. And it's just strange.
Yeah, that whole description of the cave of the whistling bear just really made my hair stand up when you mentioned that the first time, because I was like, gee, that sounds like a place where a gugly would live. Whistling bear, yeah. I should probably digress for a second here and mention a gugly story that came from the Canadian province north of me, I think it was the northeastern side of it. There's a researcher up there that does basic Bigfoot research, and he's gotten a few of these reports of things that ain't Bigfoot, and he passed them along to me, and they're gugly reports. And the guy had a little paddock for his 2 huge Malamute dogs, and the concrete pad with chain link fence around it, cover on top of the whole thing. And one night he heard his dogs just freaking out, and he went out and turned on the light and looked, and there was some huge bear-looking thing that was trying to get through the chain link fence around the dog's enclosure and get at the dogs. So he grabbed his gun, took a shot at it, and took off. So next night, repeat performance, only this time the dogs are really freaking out, and he hears what sounds like the chain link fence tearing. So turns on the light, grabs the gun, opens up the door. Whatever it is now has already killed one of his dogs and has it under its arm and is trying to reach in and grab the other one. So this time he shoots it like 2 or 3 times. He's pretty sure he hits it. It lets out a blood-curdling roar and bolts off into the woods. So now he's seriously freaked out. He's pretty sure this isn't a bear or whatever it is. Took off on hind legs. So he calls his buddies and says, hey, I got some weird thing up here. I need your help. Can you guys come over here in the morning, first light? We'll track this thing out and shoot the whatever the hell it is. Okay, so they showed up. So in the morning, they all had their big high-powered rifles, and they went to, back there, and they could see its trail going off into the woods where it had left with the dog it killed. And they tracked it, and I can't remember if he said it was half mile or quarter mile. It wasn't very far, and they lost its track. They lost its trail. And they all kind of fanned out and looked for more signs of where it went or anything and just couldn't find any. And after about an hour, they, disgruntled and disgusted, turned around and came back to the house. When they got back to the house, the head of the missing dog was sitting on his porch.
Wow. That's just crazy.
That's crazy.
Another story that I have. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I just wanted to point out that's kind of similar to the story you were just mentioning.
Yeah. My dad and I both have had experiences with what you would call shapeshifters. My dad's story was his younger brother was into dark magic, dark stuff. And him and my dad were not getting along, and my dad's brother was just doing stupid things, and he called my dad out and said, I want to meet with you because I want to talk with you. And they met at this local establishment, and my dad was just sitting there drinking his coffee, and this man came up behind him that was over 6 foot tall. My dad's like 5'9", 5'5", 5'8", 5'9", about my height. And he grabbed my dad and picked him up. And my dad knew that this gentleman had the intent on hurting him. And when he did, my dad has been trained in various types of martial arts. And unfortunately, he never trained me in any of that because the stuff I know hurts people, and you don't need to know that stuff. It'll just get you into trouble. It's probably wise because I probably would have gotten myself into trouble. So my dad just lays this guy out flat, breaks his nose. And as he's looking at him in front of my dad's eyes, Duke, his face contorts, and it's my dad's little brother. And when my dad's little brother came to, he just spoke to him in the most demonic voice, and he says, I'm going to kill you. I'm tired of you. And he got up and walked out. And from that point on, my dad really hasn't had much to do with his little brother. We hear from him now and then, and he's living on the streets. But that is the experience that my dad had. And I had one when I was 16 years old.
So wait, now back up. This is your uncle, technically.
Yes, this was my uncle.
And he's now living on the streets, so that black magic thing didn't work out all that well, huh?
It didn't work out. He was he was into meth and things like that, and he's living in homeless shelters, and they kick him out when he doesn't bathe and things like this. And he gets a call. My dad gets a call from my uncle every couple months saying, hey, I need your help. I'm kind of broke. And my dad says, well, there's nothing I can do for you. And so, yeah, it's sad. But yeah, that did not work out for him. When I was living in the state of Washington, I was 16 years old. I was part of the church. I'd been on a mission to Germany, Poland, and Russia for a month and a half. And so I was pretty involved in the church and the youth group, things like that. My sister, her husband divorced her, left her with 2 kids. So I was working at a grocery store after school, and I would pick up things that she needed, diapers, milk, things like that, to just kind of help support the kids because they were under 5 years old. Well, my sister started making new friends and stuff because she moved back to our hometown after this divorce. And I was talking with my sister, and she told me that there was a girl that she knew that was a Christian that she'd like to get us, introduce us, who knows. And I was thinking, great, I'm looking for a wife in the next couple of years, someone that loves Jesus, that wants to be in ministry. That's a great opportunity. Least of all, we could be friends. And her name was Cindy, and Cindy started leaving me notes with scripture, and I started leaving her notes, and my sister said, well, you want to meet her one of these nights? And she arranged it. She had some friends over, and I come to my sister's house, and I got off work. It was after 10 from the grocery store, and it was a Friday night, so I had a little bit of time before I had to go back to work the next day. And we're sitting there drinking coffee. I met some of her new friends, and she goes, yeah, Cindy, she knows Jesus. We started talking about this and stuff, and we had a great time. And she says, it's interesting that you know so much about scripture and mythology, and I mean, we talked about everything. And she says, I want you to meet a friend of mine that's taught me a lot of stuff. And I said, okay, great. And as I'm looking at her, she puts her hair in a ponytail, and this is the God honest truth. Her face begins to contort, like it became blurry. Her bones in her face, cheekbones changed. Her eye color changed, and she looked like a dude. She turned into what looked to me like a man. And she started talking to me in this voice, this deep, deep voice. And she said, he said, when she went from a she to a he, I don't remember what he went by, what his name was, but he started telling me that he was a personality that has taught her about all these religions and things because she needed help. And this is freaking me out. I'm getting up. I start praying in the name of Jesus. Her new friend, my sister's new friends started to freak out, and they started to just manifest, and these demonic voices start coming out of them. And by this time, I'm on the phone calling my pastor saying, we need the elders. We got a bunch of people here that I think they're demon possessed or something. And I went and I grabbed a shotgun.
Call it an air raid.
You will leave now. And the shotgun got their attention. And I'm just praying, and my sister's going, no, they're my friends. They don't mean no harm. And I make all these people leave the house, and this one guy just starts cursing me. So I take a shot at the freaking garbage can. I always load first with birdshot, and then I've got buckshot. And I said, the next round, I'll kill you. And because I'm 16 years old, this is the most evil thing I've ever seen, and I probably overreacted. And I don't suggest that you pull a gun on people like that. But I'm going, here's my niece and nephew, my sister. She's physically handicapped. She's got cerebral palsy. She can hardly walk. And these people are over here doing God knows what. Well, then the cops were called because of a gunshot in this trailer park. And I'm trying to explain to this cop what's going on. And he says, I'm going to give you a warning because I know your dad. My dad was well known and well respected in this little community, and ends up leaving. And I'm sitting there shaking, and I get a call back from the pastor. He says, me and the elders don't want anything to do with this, Toby. We'll pray for you from here. We don't want anything to do with this. In this small town that I grew up in, there was a large cult, a satanic cult, and a lot of the politicians and older family were involved in this. And I got more stories. I won't go into it tonight. But a long story short, my sister and I was helping a couple of these young women, and one of them I worked with at the grocery store. She was a checker. Her family and her husband's family was connected, and she was going to leave him because of all the sexual and satanic abuse that were going on with her kids and the things that she had to be a part of. And my sister and I successfully helped one young lady with a daughter leave town because she talked about giving birth to sacrifices. This is this is some pretty heavy stuff. Well, these people were a part of that organization, if you can call it that. And my sister said, well, these people were trying to leave the cult and try to get out of it. And this one lady, Cindy, she had been sexually abused and on the altar and all this stuff. She has to have all these other spirits in her to keep her sanity because she's broken. And I said, no, honey, in my opinion, these are demonic spirits that's possessed her from that. And from that point on, this gal didn't have anything to do with my sister or me or anything. So those are my family's two encounters with shape-shifting individuals, which I believe that were under demonic power. Now, maybe it was all an illusion, and I don't know. I don't know if there was a physical transform. It looked like it to me, enough to freak the senior pastor out of a decent sized church, and the elders. They said they'd pray for me, but they didn't want to come. So that's the experience there that I've had, and I've had a lot of experiences of casting demons out of people that have been there generations. I've helped a individual that was a high priestess from out of Colorado that was part of a large 1,000-member church, satanic. I won't say church. I'll say satanic cult. And like I said, that stuff is real. And if it wasn't for my faith in Christ and the power of God, there was nothing in me that could have helped these people. But it's just a crazy world we live in.
Yeah, I know it's real. I used to live in Minnesota, and there's plenty of witches, Satanists, and assorted crazed cultists living in that state. I knew several of them, and was not convinced that any of them were doing things that were useful or helpful.
Sorry, go ahead, Duke.
For others.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of in our community, and even doing the whole cryptid stuff too. It's like, because we want to help. Well, we were researching, Toby and I, our area again, and he sent me a link, and I kind of dug into it. But there's 49 tunnels under our town, 21.6 miles of tunnels. And as they were making these tunnels, 20 people died making these tunnels. And so what the city did, they filled a lot of them up with concrete. Other ones are hidden. They purposely planted like trees and sagebrush and whatnot to try and block the entrances to these tunnels. But these tunnels connect, it's general belief from the natives that they all connect to that largest lava cave in the world, which is just outside of Twin. And then we have the world's deepest canyon here in Twin too, and all these tunnels. So we know it's all connected. And I did send you a newspaper clipping or an article of one of these caves here in Idaho that a man's body was found and without a head. 40 years ago, they found a man's body inside this cave, and his head was missing, and it was never recovered. This man's head. And so I think about the whole whistling bear, and how that's kind of like their MO right there. They, for some reason, they love to remove people's heads, and speaking of the whole paranormal stuff, we get into why these cryptids do weird stuff. They can reappear, they can manifest, they can speak to your mind, they can do all these weird things. And we believe, through the power of Jesus and our faith, that we have dominion here on earth. And so just to give you guys some background on the paranormal side of things with my life, my mom used to be a practicing Wicca. I remember as a little kid, probably about 6 or 7 years old, my late at night, I'd be trying to sleep, and I would hear growling or scratching on the walls. And I would get really scared, and I'd run out to the living room, and my mom would be with her friends doing like seances, and they'd have this book, this Wicca book, and they have their candles lit, and I'd go and tell her, and she'd tell me I was just dreaming, just go back to sleep. And I knew like something weird was happening. So my mom had, she was practicing this witchcraft stuff, and it opened all kinds of doors in our family and in my life, and herself. My mom, bless her heart, she has a lot of mental and anxiety issues and depression and stuff like that. But as a kid also, she would get into her psychotic episodes, and she would claim that a hat man was following her. She'd claim that this shadow man who had like those hats that you could see the brim of the hat, that he would follow her and appear to her and try and take her. And as a little kid, I'm freaked out, and because she would go into this psychotic episode to where she was a little girl again. And this happened periodically throughout my life, and I purely thought it was a mental thing. I thought it was her, her mental unstableness and whatnot, her nervous breakdowns. And in 2012, around there, I was working at a factory, And my wife calls me. She says, Chewy, you need to get to your mom's now. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, she's having another one of these psychotic episodes and nobody could hold her down. She's screaming, she's fighting, she's yelling about this Hat Man. And I never told my wife about the Hat Man. And she told me, she said the Hat Man, I was like, oh, okay, it's that same stuff when I was a kid, you know, her psychotic episode. I'm going to go and comfort her. So I left work. I get to the house, and my wife and a couple of my aunts, my mom's sisters, are trying to hold her down. And my mom is screaming and kicking, and she's pointing at the corner of the living room, and she's saying, he's there, he's back, the Hat Man. And I look in the corner, and there's a shadow in the corner, and it looks like a regular shadow in a corner. It's in the upper right corner, and I see it, and I'm just, it gives me flashbacks as a little kid. Like, I gotta talk her down. I gotta, because everybody's telling her there's nothing there. She gets mad. And so as a kid, I learned, like, oh yeah, I understand. I believe you, Mom, but it's okay. Nothing's gonna happen to you. So I started to do that. I said, Mom, I'm like, it's okay. I see him. Is he right there in the corner? She goes, yeah, he's right there. And this shadow, no freaking joke, man. I go and I put my hand up and put my finger like I'm pointing. I go right here. And when I did that, it was ice freaking cold in this corner. This shadow, it was ice cold. And as soon as my finger touched it, goosebumps came all over my body, man. And I had that sense of fear and of dread. And right then and there, it hit me, all those years that she was dealing with this, that it wasn't just a psychotic episode, that it was a spiritual, some kind of demonic attack. And so then I was already a man of God by then. I was already volunteering with our church and being a minister and all that. So as soon as I felt that, all these flashbacks came back to me of the times that she was crying and screaming that this entity was following her. So I started to pray. And I started rebuking this shadow, and all my family, they were looking at me like I was the crazy one. They're like, you know, are you actually going with this, Chewy? And I didn't have time to explain. And I just started praying, pleading the blood of Jesus. And no joke, this shadow started going smaller and smaller to where it was just a normal shadow. And it was gone. And then when it was gone, then she loosened up and she got up, and then she was, you know, of course she's weeping and she's crying, and I'm like, okay, I'm here, Mom. And I got to talk to her. I said, I know you're right. I know what you're seeing. It's not just in your mind. It's a real entity that's following you, you know. And so that gives you a background of my mom and how I grew up and surrounded by this darkness. And back then, nobody was going to church. Nobody, there was no foundation of Christ in our family or anything like that. So since I gave my life to Christ, it really has opened up that door for me to see any attachments, any kind of demonic activity that goes around with my family, which is a lot, by the way. And you know, I have a lot of stories I'm going to share with you guys tonight, and these are all real stuff that I've seen with my own eyes, stuff that I've experienced, something that my wife has experienced and have witnessed with her own eyes. So, you know, my wife, she doesn't like scary movies. She doesn't like to mess around with any of that. Me, I'm more of a creature feature guy. I like, you know, the Bigfoot movies and, you know, like creature films.
I like those too. Hey, before we go on, I want to hit on a philosophical point here with you. The depression or possession or just oppression that tends to go on. A lot of people that I've run into in the past that seem like they should be clinically depressed, and these are probably the people they prescribe meds to. And it's not like it seems to me in a lot of cases that what was going on there wasn't any kind of chemical imbalance or anything. It's that they had an attachment from some kind of a negative entity that was oppressing them.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what I believe now. Then, of course, the doctors told me, and all of our family believed it was just some kind of chemical imbalance in, you know, in her brain or whatever. And then, but
well, that's all the doctors qualified to diagnose. They can't prescribe an exorcist. They're going to prescribe some drugs so they can make money off it, and they don't know anything about that anyway.
So, something that we do want to be clear, Duke, is that we are not qualified to say this person has this, that person has that. But with personal experiences that we've had, there are times that the Spirit of the Lord can speak to us and we can pray in situations and it helps and it works. And
Yeah.
we've never told people to quit taking their medication. That's not our place. We don't have the expertise in that. We're not an authoritarian on that. We just know what, life has taught us. We know, I've got someone that is dear to me in my immediate family that struggles with PTSD, bipolar 2, and other things like that. And there's times that we're praying because those medications, your body changes, they're constantly adjusting the level. So I'm very intimate with people who have a loved one that deals with that stuff on a day-to-day basis and struggles. And so, like I said, we're not saying that everything out there like that is demonic, but sometimes it can be, or if somebody has cursed somebody, or if there are things like that can come against you. And when you pray and God speaks to your heart, you can ask, not living in anger, not living in fear, not living in with hate in your heart. Things like that will release us from some of those side effects of that stuff.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, I've had plenty of friends in the past that fall into that category where there is something chemically wrong with them, and they were diagnosed successfully, and they gave them the right meds, which made them more or less normal again. But what I'm talking about is the flip side of it, where as much as doctors may know about all this clinical stuff, they know nothing about the spiritual side of it.
Correct.
And they'll give you all these drugs and stuff and go, why isn't this working? This usually works on everybody else. You should be improving. Well, because it's not a physical problem. That's why it's not working.
Yep. I just wanted to be clear on both sides of those things, and just, we realize that there is a clinical side, but like I said, there's also, you're absolutely 100%, there is a spiritual side in these dark entities, whether it's a experience with a Sasquatch in the woods, or it's a shadow person, or you're dealing with the little people. I mean, or alien stuff. I can tell you stories about those things too later.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into that. Toby's got a crazy one that we really want him to share. So going back real quick to this, my wife not messing around watching these scary movies or anything, and she says that she especially doesn't like vampire movies, so of course I'm like, well, why don't you like vampire movies, And so she tells me that when she was a kid, with her father and a couple cousins driving here in Aberdeen, Idaho, which is a tiny little town, desolate area. Nothing's going on out there, right? Just a little town, and they're driving by this cemetery at night, and their car breaks down, and they pull over onto the side of the cemetery, and the cemetery has these old rusted up metal spike fence, and on the cemetery there's a big tree, and they're parked right next to this tree, basically underneath the tree, as the adults are trying to figure out what's going on with the car. And she says that she looks at the tree, and she says she sees a man who's hanging upside down, like holding on to the tree with his feet. And he was really pale looking, and he had his hands around his chest, and he looked at her, and he did some kind of face expression to her or something, and she screamed and freaked out. And when she looked again, he was gone. And her family just were telling her that her mind was playing tricks on her or whatever, as a little girl. But she really to this day believes that it was some kind of vampiric entity that she saw that chose to reveal itself to her there at that cemetery. And so she knows that's what she believes wholeheartedly. And another thing that she doesn't like is owls. She really associates owls as bad omens, and it's part of our Hispanic culture as well, as I'm going to get into. But her story, again, in this little tiny town of Aberdeen, her and her mother are driving, and the sun is starting to set, and she says out in the freshly harvested cornfield that she sees a man-sized owl. She says this owl, first they thought it was a man. She said her mom even saw it, that they thought it was a person standing in the middle of this field. And again, this place is desolate. I mean, there's nobody around, and they're driving and they see this huge figure, and they thought it's a person, and as they got closer, they saw it was a giant owl. They said she says 100% it was an owl the size of a person, and it was just standing there watching them. And you know how their heads can do that 360 thing, that it followed their vehicle without moving its body, but its head just followed them and just watched them the whole time. And then that same night, her uncle was murdered. Somebody murdered her uncle, and so therefore, she really takes the owls as a omen. So whenever we're driving or we see them, she sees them fly over the car at night or something, she jumps into prayer for herself and for her family, just for God's protection, because she believes it's kind of omen that there's some kind of darkness attached to these things. And getting into our culture, in our Hispanic culture, there's a thing by the name, and I'm going to say the word in Spanish, it's called the lechuza. And what that is, it's a shape-shifting witch that takes the form of an owl. And growing up as a kid in this part of Texas that I lived in, because I'd go back and forth from Texas and Idaho, and this area I lived in was heavily wooded, and everybody there knew about the lechuza. It was a common rule that the kids shouldn't be out at certain parts of those woods at night. And if you hear a whistle at night, that you never reply to this whistle, because if you reply to this whistle, that's presumably from this lechuza, that it'll come and get you, like you're marked, and it primarily wants children. So it has that whole darkness part of it. So the story that I'm going to tell you guys that is really out there, but this is what happened, man, to me as a kid and to my family. Living on this same property I'm talking about in Texas, my grandpa had some chickens and some goats and a few other animals, and he had some woods that a patch of woods right behind our house, and something was taking his chickens. You know, he'd wake up in the morning and there'd be a chicken torn apart. Some nights he would only find the feathers left. Others he'd find pieces of it, and so it was driving him nuts. So what he did is he took one of these parts of this chicken that was left, and he wired it to the top of our fence. And he put it on a wire, so it looked like it was just roosting up there, basically. And so he waited for 2 nights. He didn't sleep for 2 nights, and he was waiting with a shotgun because he wanted to find whatever was killing these chickens. And by the way, this is the same porch where this baboon-looking creature came up and scared the heck out of my friend that I shared on the last show. We're having our sleepover, and my friend swears a baboon was looking at us. And so the same property. And anyways, on the second night, about 3 a.m, we hear a couple of gunshots, boom, boom, from the shotgun. And so we freak out. We go running outside, and my grandpa has a spotlight on. And what we see on this fence, that it's this massive owl. It's just an abnormally large owl, and its talons were still attached to this chicken, but it was dead. My grandpa shot it. And so he told us, don't come near it. He's like, get back. He goes, just go inside. And so we went inside, and this was late. This was like 1, 2 a.m, and it was really strange because all the adults in the house were not going to sleep. Like, they were bothered. Something was going on. They're talking. They don't want us to hear. We have to stay in our rooms. And I'm like, what's the big deal? It's just an owl. He shot the owl, you know? And so I end up going back to sleep, and I go to school. When I come home from school, as I'm walking it from the driveway, I see this giant, what's remains of a giant fire. Like there wasn't a fire pit there. Like they just made a bonfire or something. And I thought that was strange. Like, well, that wasn't there yesterday. You know, they just lit a fire right there. So I go to one of my aunts and I ask her, I'm like, hey, what's going on? And everybody was still like on edge. But my grandpa had a couple new chickens. He had some new goats that were just there. And so my aunt tells me that this owl that they shot was a lechuza. It was a witch taking the form of this owl. So the only way to truly kill it was they had to burn it. So she says what they did is they took this owl, they got this fire roaring, and they threw it in the fire. And when it started to burn, it came back alive, and it started to scream like a woman, and it flapped its wings. And when all the feathers burnt off of it, that it was a little tiny miniature woman, like an old hag. It looked like a little old hag, and they burnt it till it was gone. They stayed up all night making sure that even the bones were burnt on this thing. And I guess the neighborhood, the other elders in my neighborhood at this time, they brought my grandpa gifts. They brought him chickens, they brought him goats, they brought him all kinds of gifts because he supposedly killed this lechuza that was terrorizing this neighborhood. And so that's part of our culture with owls. And my wife grew up the same way. We always believed lechuza, there was a dark side to owls, and for her having the omen of this man-sized owl and then the murder and all that. So it was, that's part of our culture. And my wife, they grew up in the church. My wife did. Her grandfather was actually an evangelist. Her uncles have been church planters, where they plant churches and they travel the world. And my wife's mom, a mother-in-law, actually was a part of a traveling band. They would travel the world, doing worshiping for churches, and they would record albums and stuff for ministry. But my wife's grandfather, by the name of Frez, wasn't always a minister. He didn't have a relationship with God, and he's from Idaho. And so the story of what happened and of why he became an evangelist and why his brothers turned their lives to Christ, and they started the band and they traveled the world and they started planting churches. And the reason why is because his oldest daughter, by the name of Irene, which is my wife's aunt, she was about 2 years old or so, under 2 years old, and she got a really high fever, and she ended up passing away. She died. And my wife's grandfather, was at the hospital, and she was dead. She was declared dead. And so he began to pray. He never prayed before, he said, and he asked God that God would help him and bring his daughter back. And he said that he would give his life to ministry, that he would do whatever God wanted. And I kid you not, Irene came back to life. They were already draining her body, her fluids from her ankles. And it's a testimony to this day in our family, where she has the scars on her feet, and she has the papers and everything from the hospital, and it changed his life, and he therefore became an evangelist. And his brothers became church planters. Everything that was like a deal for them, that somebody actually was raised from the dead, and this is real stuff. Well, unfortunately, he ended up dying really young of cancer. And the story that is behind his he had throat cancer, some kind of cancer in his throat. He had a vision one night. He said that a demonic entity appeared to him, and it stuck its hand inside of his throat, and it grabbed him by the throat, he says. And he says when he came out of the vision, he had a pain in his neck, and a lump formed, and he went to the hospital, and they found it was a really aggressive cancer, and it actually took him out pretty quick and killed him. So kind of traumatized the family. But that gives you guys the background of my wife, of her family, and how their family began serving the Lord, and everybody still is. And it's just an amazing thing. But these things are real. These stories may seem out there to some people, that but the Bible's full of people being raised from the dead, and these things are real. And I do have another story and Toby's part of this one too.
Before you go on,
yeah.
Have you been aware of the connection? Obviously, owls in folklore and mythology have negative connotation. That's pretty much universal. But are you aware of the connection between them and the little gray aliens?
Actually, I'm not.
There's been several people that have started having memories reappear because their memory wasn't wiped properly, and they were abducted and went in and had hypnotic regression done to recover more of their memories. And a lot of these people that had this situation had memory overlays that included them running into owls. And so essentially in their memory, they were seeing an owl when it was actually a gray alien.
That's really bizarre. That definitely, I could see how it's tied in together. You know, speaking of the aliens, you know, we'll share this quick little story with you guys. Researching on the internet about these aliens and all this, you know, because we know they're out there, right? So the only actual article that I could find that is legit of these cattle mutilations and all that, there was an actual human body that was found out in a ranch here in Idaho that was mutilated just like these cows were, where certain organs were moved, where they're cookie cutter cuts, and then the same ranch where they were having these cows that were being mutilated, and all of a sudden somebody, I think it was a ranch hand, that said that his body was found mutilated out there in the ranch, you know. And so it's interesting to think about the area we live in, the Magic Valley, and here in Idaho, and it's like the only one I could find was from Idaho, and it's like, man, it's just this rabbit hole goes deep, man. It just keeps going and going. And
you brought up the magic words there, rabbit hole, which is the other thing I want to ask you about before you go on any further. They dug out 22 miles of tunnels underneath your city. Why were they digging tunnels?
Well, according to the article, it's for water, for the canal system, for irrigation, and for you know, for cisterns and whatnot, is what it says. And but you know, who knows?
So somebody thinks at least one of these connecting tunnels went into the original lava tubes, and things from there were getting into them.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that's why they had to collapse some of these and seal them off.
And I do know, through looking through this is Toby, looking through old documents, and I'm really familiar with the layout of the city because of what I do for a living. There are several schools that have old bomb shelters in them, and they've got tunnels running from the bomb shelters to other important buildings in the town back when they were building these. They're all connected, and for some reason, I do not know why, and I've not found out why, that, you know, like the police station would be connected to this building, and that building would be connected to the courthouse with these tunnels and the bomb shelters and things. So that's also really pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. You know, about the alien thing, I would love for Toby to share his encounter with the gray.
My story starts when I was about 9 years old, I think. And it's interesting that you brought up memory regression and things like that. Have you ever seen the movie called Space Odyssey 2001?
Yep.
And then Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind?
Yep.
Those two movies, when I was a young man, 8, 9-ish, I started having memories. When I was about that age, I was searching, and I was reading a lot on mythology. I was reading a lot on the Fae, the little people, leprechauns, Kerkervorkins, things like that. And when I watched Space Odyssey 2001, I don't know what it was about that movie. It was like my memory was unlocked, and I had images, and I had remembering laying in my bed at night and then being pulled up through the ceiling. And as I'm being pulled up through the ceiling, I don't know if it was just like a dream or if it was astronomical travel, because I've had some experiences with that as a kid, and I've got stories of my great-grandfather having stories being able to do that, or if it was an actual, I was taken up into something. But I have these horrible memories of being taken aboard something and a sheet put over me and things done. And I can't get past that. And I remember these small creatures. I first thought that they were like leprechauns or fairies or something like that. And they may have a connection to those as well, because I've got stories later on we can share of experiences that I've had growing up in Washington State, experiences that I've had here in Idaho, and my children have had. And so that was my first encounter of remembering of this happening a handful of times. And it was those movies that jarred my memory, and I don't know why. Fast forward to 1998, when my oldest son was born. I'd been married for 2 years, and I was a pastor of a church, and I was traveling as a missionary, for a couple months at a time. And my son was probably about 6 months old. My wife and I were living in a house that had a good sized house, that in the basement it had like another living quarters. And that's where we were staying, because our bishop owned the house, and we were staying in the bottom portion of it, because that was kind of part of the church providing for us, because I worked a full-time job as well, and then I'd pastor, because I wasn't paid at the church, because we only had like 150 members, very small church. But we had a huge food bank, we had a mission, and we would travel to mostly Eastern Europe. And at this time, I had gone for a 3-week trip over to Poland and Ukraine, because I was over there teaching in one of their Bible colleges, and I was doing some evangelism work and training with some of the local pastors and these 2 denominations that we had become a part of. And as I was gone, my wife was downstairs in our room, and she was sleeping, and her story of recounting of the story was, she was sleeping, and it was around 3:00 in the morning. A lot of weird things happen at 3 in the morning. I don't know why. I've just seen and experienced that. All of a sudden, she wakes up in a panic, and there's a blinding light in her eyes. And then these 3 small, about 3 foot tall, gray little figures appear, what you would think of what we've described as these gray aliens. And there is such a demonic presence, a malevolent presence in the room. And one of them walks over to her and is just staring at her in the eyes. She can't move. She can't hardly breathe. The only thing she can do is think. And in her mind, she's just terrified. She's horrified. And the other 2 walk over, and they reach and they start doing things to my 6-month-old son. And as she's sitting there, in her mind, the only thing she could do is cry out the name Jesus in her mind. And then she starts trying to worship God in her mind. And as she does that, it was all of a sudden, this dark power just broke, and she could get up. And when she did, she cried out the name of Jesus. These things screamed, and they disappeared. My wife grabs my son. As soon as she's able to walk, she grabs my son, and she runs upstairs, and she finds our bishop's wife and his daughter. And they slept in the same room the rest of the night. And I got news of this about a day and a half after it happened, because communication at the time was really hard to some of the small villages and places that we were at. But that was my wife's experience, and my son, when he was my firstborn son's experience of that, of with aliens.